Good morning and welcome to United Way for Southeastern Michigan's virtual town hall. My name is Audrey Walker and thank you so much for joining us. Today's topic is a discussion around criminal justice reform. Late last year, we saw numerous pieces of legislation passed and signed by our governor that will have meaningful impact for those in our area. We will also have a question and answer session during the last 10 minutes of today's town hall. So please leave your questions in the Q&A chat box if you're joining us on Zoom or in the comment box on Facebook. And we are joined today by John Cooper, the Executive Director for Safe and Just Michigan. Safe and Just Michigan is a statewide research and advocacy organization whose mission is to mobilize support for smart investments in services and programs proven to reduce crime and promote healthy, thriving communities. John joined Safe and Just Michigan in 2017 as policy director after serving as criminal policy advisor to State Representative David LeGrand. Before he joined Representative LeGrand's office, John spent 7 years as litigator in the Washington, D.C. office of Latham and Watkins LLP. He also served as a law clerk to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. John obtained his Juris Doctorate from the University of Virginia School of Law after graduating with honors from Calvin College. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much, Audrey. It's really great to be here. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about some of the legislative successes we've been involved in over the last few months. 2020 was one of the most significant years for criminal justice reform that the state of Michigan has ever seen. And I'm going to talk about 5 different packages of bills that passed that are going to help hundreds of thousands of people in Michigan get better jobs and housing, and stay out of the criminal justice system. I want to start with expungements, which is criminal record sealing. Until recently, Michigan had a pretty narrow criminal record sealing law. You could apply to get your conviction sealed from the public record. Law enforcement still keeps a private one. You can get your record sealed if you're 5 years out from the end of your sentence or community supervision, and you had no more than 1 felony or 2 misdemeanors on your record. Now, this was inadequate for lots of reasons. It's a hard process for people to navigate. Many people don't feel like they can navigate it without a lawyer. Courts are only open during business hours. You got to go to the place where you're convicted. So if you live somewhere else now, you got to travel. So about 6.5% of all eligible people were able to navigate that process. So we wanted to expand eligibility to more convictions, more kinds of convictions. And we also wanted to make record sealing automatic for some convictions as well, so that people don't have to navigate the petition process themselves. So the new law, which was signed by the governor in October, there's 2 components to it. One is the eligibility expansion for petitions, and the second one is the automatic expungement. The eligibility expansion goes into effect in April. And it does, among other things, it makes traffic offenses eligible for expungement for the first time. Traffic offenses are about half of all criminal cases in Michigan. They're extremely common. Lots of people have them, but they show up on background checks. And they're creating problems for people in getting jobs, in getting housing, access to credit, access to post-secondary education. So this is going to dramatically expand the kinds of convictions that are eligible. There's also a bill that makes marijuana misdemeanors eligible for expungement. The only condition is that if the conduct would be legal today after the ballot initiative, it's eligible to be expunged. In addition, they accelerated the waiting period for misdemeanor expungements to 3 years instead of 5. And they also increased the number of convictions that are eligible to 3 felonies. And there's not a limit on the number of misdemeanors anymore. The exception is you can only get 2 assaultive crimes expunged. You can only get 1 felony of a kind expunged. So say you have 2 assault convictions, you can only get 1 of those expunged under the new law. And the automatic expungement will go into effect at the end of 22. We're hoping to get that accelerated. But when it's up and running, it will everybody who's 10 years out from a conviction will be eligible to get 2 felonies and 4 misdemeanors expunged. There's some exceptions. Assaultive crimes are not eligible. If the crime is punishable by more than 10 years in prison, it's not eligible. And there's a couple other restrictions too, but lots and lots of people, we estimate up to 1 million people will see conviction records sealed as a result of that law. So that's a very important reform. There was also a large package of bills that came out of a jail reform task force that was set up by the governor and staffed by the Pew Charitable Trusts. There's a number of reforms, and I'm just going to tick through them that passed. The most important, in my view, is that it's eliminating driver's license suspensions for unpaid fines and fees. 350,000 people annually see their driver's license suspended because they have outstanding fines and fees. And that's just not a good way to run things. People need to drive in Michigan. If they're not driving dangerously, they should be able to do that. In addition, this package of bills reclassified many traffic misdemeanors as civil infractions. So you're not going to be arrested, you're not going to go to jail, you just have to pay a fine. And that's really important because a number of traffic offenses are among the leading causes of admission to jail in Michigan. For example, driving with a suspended license is the third leading cause of admission to jail in Michigan. And that ties back into the driver's license suspension issue. In addition, there are a number of crimes that carry a mandatory jail sentence. They're traffic offenses. There's other regulatory violations like DNR stuff. Got rid of all the mandatory jail sentences there. So it'll be up to the prosecutor locally to decide whether jail is warranted, prosecutor and judge is warranted or not. We're expanding officers' discretion to issue a citation instead of arrest someone. Right now, for most crimes, that officer does not have discretion not to arrest someone. And this is actually something that takes up a lot of law enforcement resources because so many of our criminal cases in Michigan are traffic offenses. There's a lot of, somebody gets a driving with suspended license and the officer has to take them in. It doesn't matter if they're 2 hours from the county jail, they got to do that. This package of bills gives them much more discretion not to. Just say, here's your court date, show up then. There's some really good bills that came out around warrants. Outstanding warrants are a major cause of admission to jail in Michigan. This creates a pathway for sort of first-time failure to appear and other major causes of warrants to be resolved without an arrest. It creates a presumption of non-jail, non-probation sentences for the lowest level misdemeanors so that a judge has to affirmatively decide that probation or jail is warranted. It expands eligibility for diversion through the Homes Youthful Trainee Act, or HIDA, to 24 and 25-year-olds. It also reduces the maximum probation terms from 5 years to 3 and caps how long a person can be reincarcerated for a technical violation to a matter of days. Because what we were seeing in a lot of places is if a person commits a technical violation of the probation, they're just thrown in jail and left to sit there. Okay, so there's a lot of different reforms, and I'm happy to answer questions about them, but I want to keep going. The next, I think, really important area of reforms is around occupational licensing. You guys probably are familiar with the fact that it's hard to get a license if you have a conviction on your record. The reason for that is most licenses in Michigan require that a person have quote unquote good moral character. And the licensing boards historically have looked at convictions as evidence of not having a good moral character, even if it's a very old conviction, even if it's a conviction that has nothing to do with the job the person's trying to do. For example, lots of people have DUIs, and DUIs are used not to give people barber's licenses. DUIs are used not to give people roofers licenses and the like. And so this package says the licensing board the burden is on the licensing board to make the case that an old conviction should be disqualifying. And that's really important because it's going to help a lot of people with old convictions that have moved on from them to get good jobs, get occupational licensing, support themselves and their families. And this is a little under the radar, but this is another really important thing. So we're in a pandemic. Food insecurity is a huge problem for people. And the food stamp program, which is SNAP, has historically been unavailable to people who have multiple drug convictions, and sharply restricted even for people that just have one old drug conviction. And the reality is, like, whether you have a drug conviction on your record does not have anything to do with whether you need food stamps. And so Michigan, and we were one of the last states to do this, unfortunately, but Michigan passed a law waiving this requirement so that people with old drug convictions can get food stamps if they need them. So that's really important. The final thing I'll just mention before we go to questions is there's also an issue with juvenile records. The juvenile system in Michigan, is designed to be more treatment-oriented, problem-solving, but most states seal juvenile records. But in Michigan, juvenile records were widely available to the public. And so there was a bill package called Clean Slate for Kids that makes juvenile records non-public and also creates an automatic expungement after a certain waiting period. Doesn't apply to all juvenile records. The most serious crimes don't fall within this, but for a lot of people, you get into trouble, in your teens, shoplifting, underage drinking, whatever. And that's not something that, as a matter of policy, we think should be public once a person has served their punishment and stayed out of trouble. So that's 5 major reforms we've seen in Michigan. We're really excited about all of them, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of those. It's, there's too much going on for me to really get into detail in my summary. So let me know if you have any questions about anything I've said.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, for all of that information and insight into those reforms. One of the questions I just have off the top of my head is, if I did have specific questions about previous convictions, who should I contact to see if I'm eligible for expungement?
Yeah, and this is actually going to be a big part of what we're working on in 21. Legal aid does do expungements, but their bandwidth is limited. Keep an eye out for expungement fairs in your area. The city of Detroit has something called Project Clean Slate. They have 2 full-time attorneys that do expungements for free for residents of the city. And they've also gotten some additional funding to do more of those. I'm in the process of talking to legal aid and the Michigan Poverty Law Program and business groups, the State Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. I'm trying to put together a legal support system for people who need expungement help, because the resources out there are not adequate right now. I'm also working with a national group called Code for America to build an eligibility tool. It'll work basically like a Google form where you type in the details of your convictions and it'll tell you your eligibility. We're hoping to have that ready to go when the bills go into effect in April. So there are resources out there, but it's kind of a patchwork right now. So we're trying to build a little bit more structure to it, and that'll take some time. But keep an eye out, with United Way and also Safe and Just Michigan. We're at Safe and Just MI on Twitter, safeandjustmi.org online, and we'll be posting additional updates as they come in.
That's great information. And I know sometimes it does take a minute to get things together, but it's good to know that there are places people can reach out to currently as well. And then just based on what we talked about today, I know you keep mentioning April. The Clean Slate legislation says automatic, but what is the timeline for having something expunged from your record? And do you have to wait a certain amount of years for something to be expunged?
Yeah. So the new eligibility law goes into effect in April. And the basic structure is going to be, if you have a misdemeanor you want to get off your record, you're probably going to be eligible after a 3-year waiting period. So if you've served your probation, the clock will start when you're done serving your probation, and you can apply in 3 years. For felonies and the most serious misdemeanors, it's 5 years, and for multiple felonies, it's going to be 7 years. And those are all for the court petition, where you put together the documents and file a motion to have your records sealed. The automatic expungement is a new system that needs to be built. We secured funding to do that, but it's still going to take some time. And right now, that's scheduled to come online late in 22. We're hoping to accelerate that, but for the next 2 years, right now, it's going to still be the petition only process. That's a process that, rests with the individual to navigate. It typically takes 6 to 9 months, just with all the steps that need to take place. There's an FBI background check that's part of that. So one of the copies of the petition goes to the state police to run your record on the FBI multi-state database. And that'll be the information that comes back out of that will go to the judge, and the judge will ask you about it at the hearing. And that will be used to make an eligibility determination. So, for example, historically, you could only get one felony sealed. And if you had a felony in Ohio and one in Michigan, that meant you were not eligible. So now that's up to 3 felonies, and there's some additional ways depending on, if it was multiple charges out of a single act or separate acts, you could actually potentially get more than 3 sealed, but that's going to be up to a judge.
And so if in the past someone had to hire a lawyer to get expungement, is that necessary now, or is there still costs to the individual?
Yeah, there's a $50 fee for the state police to run the FBI database. There's going to be fees around getting certified records from local courts. There's a court filing fee that's waived sometimes by the court, but to do it yourself, you're probably looking at between $100 and $200. To hire a lawyer would be more than that. The eligibility criteria are complex, and I do think that it could be helpful to have a lawyer, but we're also trying to expand the resources that are available to people to do it without, because right now lawyers are charging $1,000, $1,500 for this, and we'd very much like to make the system more accessible to people that at lower cost.
Yeah, definitely, especially since you mentioned that there are a lot of nuances to what is included in the expungement.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more in detail on crimes that are not covered under the clean slate?
Yeah, so for the petition process, the major carve-outs are crimes that are not eligible for expungement at all under Michigan law. So if a crime is punishable by life in prison, not eligible. Sex offenses are not eligible, although if you have a 4th degree CSC, which is the misdemeanor, and it was committed before 2015, those are still eligible. But the human trafficking violations, second offense domestic violence, stuff like that is not eligible, but most crimes are. And you just need to file the petition with the court. With the automatic expungement that'll be coming online in 22, that's a little bit more restricted. No assaultive crimes are eligible for that. And no crimes that are punishable by more than 10 years in prison are eligible for that. But the reason for that is, the legislature felt like if a judge is not going to get the opportunity to sort of take a look at the case, we shouldn't be expunging cases that involve more serious convictions without a judge's involvement. So we had to settle for, lower level felonies, nonviolent felonies, and misdemeanors.
And once something is expunged from a record, do employers see that? Do landlords see that? Is that seen anywhere? Like, what is the leave behind, I guess?
Yeah, they're not supposed to,
Okay.
but it's possible they could. So the way most background checks work is there's a commercial company that aggregates court data and sells it to background check companies. So it's possible that if you just got your records sealed, the background check people may not have figured that out yet. So it's possible that a record that was expunged could still be floating out in the background check people's data. You have a right to know if that's the case. The background check companies are covered by the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act. And if you put in an application for an apartment or for a job and you're denied because of a background check, you have a right to see that background check.
Okay.
And the background check company has a duty to correct it if, in fact, that record is sealed. But this is going to be an issue as the clean slate, the automatic expungement gets going, because the background check companies are not used to updating their records so much, and so many people are going to get records sealed as a result of this. it's going to be a challenge for those companies. Now, Pennsylvania as a state is the state that has done the best job managing this, in part because they adopted the automatic expungement a couple years ago. Ours is broader, but they got theirs up and going first. And what they do is they actually update their own files and then sell that file directly to the background check companies so that on a monthly basis, so that they know that they're accurate. And we'd like to see something like that done here, but there wasn't time to get that conversation going within the legislature this past session.
Now, you mentioned something, you were talking about driving with suspended licenses reform, and I read that the governor vetoed the DUI offenses.
Yeah.
Is that covered on a clean slate, or do you see something that might change with that this year?
That's an issue we'd certainly like to work on. We did not receive an explanation from the governor's office about why that bill was vetoed. The DUI is among the most common convictions we see in Michigan. There's 33,000 DUI convictions in 2019 alone. So there's a lot of people out there who have a DUI. Many people have multiple ones, and this bill didn't cover that situation. It said if you have one DUI in your record, you can get it sealed. And we felt that was a reasonable place to start. And I think there's a lot of interest within the legislature in trying to get something done around that. It'll need to be worked out with the governor's office because they seem to have concerns, but that's a policy that we believe would affect probably 200,000 people, and many people that we know. I mean, you ask people, everybody seems to know someone who's got a DUI on their record. So it's a really important thing, and we hope to see that added to eligibility this year, but more work needs to be done on it.
And you talked a little bit about the juvenile justice system being tricky to navigate too. Were there any reforms passed that address juvenile offenders, and will they also qualify for expungements?
Yeah, so the juvenile system is a wholly separate system from the adult system. It's actually managed by the Department of Health and Human Services in partnership with local courts. So a lot of the ways things work are a little bit different in the juvenile system than the adult system. The adult system, the state police manages the database of records. There's two major reforms around youthful juvenile justice. The first one was what's known as Raise the Age. That was last year. Michigan was one of the few states that treated 17-year-olds as adults for purposes of the criminal justice system. So Raise the Age changed that to 18 as the age of majority. I think everyone agrees that makes sense. It's important to note that Raise the Age did not take away prosecutors' abilities to charge people younger than 18 as adults. It just changed the default. And there's no retroactive resentencing of people who were sentenced to 17-year-olds. That's a question I get frequently. I think that's something that should be done, but it hasn't been done yet. And then the clean slate for kids was the second thing. It's a big deal to make the juvenile records non-public and to clear them. I mean, we hear about people having problems with colleges, people having problems with employers, landlords, because of juvenile records. And, those are not supposed, just the policies dictate that, if a person has done what they needed to do to move past the offense, then it shouldn't be hanging over their head years later. And unfortunately, that has been happening in Michigan to a lot of people.
Yeah. Now, these reforms are definitely a step in the right direction, for sure. But, for far too long, the justice system has been stacked against Black and brown people, individuals with lower incomes, et cetera. What do you see as some next steps for criminal justice reform, especially with these, having so much work done in the past year?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 50 years, honestly, of criminal justice policy that focuses on punishment rather than public safety. I think too often we as a society talk about punishment as creating public safety, but that's really not true. And you can see it every day with these traffic offenses where your license is suspended because you're poor and couldn't pay fines and fees. That's a criminalization of poverty. That's not making anybody safer. We send a ton of people into the system with mental illness. These criminal convictions hanging over people's heads years and years after after they happened. I mean, these are all examples of ways in which the system punishes people but does not improve public safety. And these are first steps, or second steps in some cases, but we still have a very large criminal justice system. It's focused on punishment in many ways. I think punishment has value in certain cases, but it shouldn't be the default, and it shouldn't be imposed in cases where the consequences of punishment are so much greater than what the person actually did. And we see this all the time with the Child Protective Services. You get pulled over for driving with a suspended license, officer has to arrest you, bail is imposed so you can't get out, and then you're stuck in jail for a week. You lose your job, CPS comes for your kids, you may lose your housing or your ability to pay for it. And what has that interaction with law enforcement done to promote public safety? It hasn't. It's undermined it by breaking up a family, creating housing instability. And so we as a society need to look at public safety as a more holistic thing. How do we prevent crime from happening? How do we put people in positions where they're not desperate and struggling and not making good choices? A healthy society would have less crime. And we are starting as a society to look at this in a more holistic, public health oriented way. And I think the more that we do that, the better results we're going to see. But we've dug ourselves a very deep hole over the last 50 years, and it's going to take time to dig out of it.
Sure. And as we wrap up here today, is there anything else that you would like to share from your perspective of either how people can help themselves or even just get involved in this legislature further to help promote public health in that way in their communities?
Yeah, so I mean, keep an eye out for more updates around legal services to help with expungements. That is something we know people need and are going to be working on. In terms of getting involved, certainly we have a newsletter, we have social media. Please do check that out. And legislators really do need to hear from constituents about these issues. Legislators have more issues on their plates than they know what to do with. So they make decisions about what to prioritize based on what they hear from their constituents. And this year, we think the incoming legislature is going to be less interested in working on criminal justice reform for a variety of reasons. So we need constituents to make it a priority for their elected officials. And that means writing letters, it means making phone calls, sending emails, and getting involved with local groups that do those things. We're a statewide group. We partner with lots of community-based groups. But we need to build a movement around these things if we're going to get the system to change in the ways we need. And that's, it's taken 50 years to get to where we are. I hope it doesn't take 50 years to unwind it all, but it's going to take time and energy and resources. So just know that it's a long haul, but it's very much worth the fight. I mean, I think there's transformative ways we can change our society by changing the way our criminal justice system works.
Definitely. Well, thanks again, John, for joining us and giving us some insight into the changes that were made last year around criminal justice reform and what we can do going forward. So that's all the time we have for questions today. And as a reminder, if you or someone you know is experiencing need, whether it's housing, utilities, food, diapers, or anything else that you're struggling with, our 211 helpline remains available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We maintain a running list of available services in the community and connect you to the supports that you need. You can also look up resources in your area by using the 211 resource database at unitedwaysem.org/211. We have an upcoming event that we'd like to let you know about. To join us January 22nd for a community conversation hosted by United Way for Southeastern Michigan and University of Michigan Poverty Solutions to discuss the findings and opportunities from a new research report on financial well-being in Detroit. You can register at the link provided in the chat. We look forward to seeing you at next week's town hall, where we will be joined by a representative from the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunities to update us on 2021 unemployment benefits. Please see unitedwaysem.org/virtual town halls to sign up for alerts, find out about upcoming town halls, and to view our previous town halls. Thank you so much and stay safe.